The Middle East is on the brink of another devastating war due to this military development. Here's what happened. While the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas since October has managed to remain in place, albeit apart from a few violations here and there, this may all change due to Hamas being heavily emboldened by a devastating event that happened within the Gaza Strip. But before we get into it, could I please remind you to subscribe to the channel? It's completely free, and all you have to do is click on the subscribe button below this video. Now let's get into it. The event I'm talking about is the elimination of one of Hamas's biggest adversaries and biggest military threats within the Gaza Strip, Yaser al-Shabab. So, as explained in this Jerusalem Post article, Abu Shabab, who is the militia chief of the popular forces, was eliminated in a gunfight. And so Yaser Abu Shabab, head of the anti-Hamas Abu Shabab militia, was killed by assassins in Gaza, Israeli sources confirmed to the Jerusalem Post on Thursday. The self-proclaimed popular forces of the Gaza Strip, the Abu Shabab militia, had reportedly been collaborating with Israel on anti-Hamas efforts in southern Gaza. So what's important to note here is that when questioned about Israel potentially giving aid to certain militias in Gaza, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu actually admitted that this was the case, that Israel had indeed been providing some assistance. However, he didn't actually elaborate on who Israel was supporting. So it remains to be seen whether Israel has been funding popular forces under Abu Shabab or a different group. But continuing with the article, Abu Shabab was killed in an internal clan scuffle, rather than by Hamas terrorists, a source confirmed. According to the source, he was initially wounded and was evacuated to a southern Israel hospital, where he succumbed to his wounds. And so this is quite important to note, because initially there were a few reports from Hamas where they were celebrating Abu Shabab's demise and claiming that he had been eliminated in a Hamas-led ambush. But clearly, this is a conflicted report. Moving on, the popular forces released a statement confirming Abu Shabab's death, and yes, they actually affirmed that he was killed whilst trying to solve a local clan dispute, not by members of Hamas, and the gang said that it would continue on with its mission until the last terrorist was eliminated in Gaza. So what's important to note here is another issue, which is the claim that he was evacuated to an Israeli hospital. So as we can see in the next paragraph, Israeli media initially reported that Abu Shabab was evacuated to Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba. However, the Beersheba hospital later clarified that he had neither been evacuated to Soroka nor had he died there. Now, the reason why I say that this specific story is so important is because if we take a look at the power distribution in Gaza at the moment, the popular forces led by Abu Shabab are the biggest opponents, the biggest threat to Hamas's military dominance in the region. And so them losing their leader like this will clearly embolden Hamas. Now, of course, it does seem as if it was not a Hamas ambush that led to his demise. However, what happened to him is equally worrying, because it was the result of an internal clan scuffle. And those who follow Middle Eastern politics closely will know that when these sorts of scuffles happen, it often can lead to the factionalization of a group. And so what is probably going to happen on the balance of probabilities is that Abu Shabab will split into smaller divisions, and so they will effectively be weakened. I'd like for us to take a look at the map of Gaza and who these different military factions are, just so that we can get a clear idea of whether or not there is still a threat to Hamas, or rather a credible threat, and how likely it is that they could rebuild and perhaps turn their sights back to Israel. So here we have a map detailing who the different military factions are within the Gaza Strip and where they operate. Now, at first glance, I understand this is quite a complicated, detailed map, but unfortunately it was almost impossible for me to make it more simplified than this, because to leave out any of the information would actually mean that you end up getting less of the context of what's really going on. But fear not, it's a very simple explanation that we're going to go through. And I'm also going to leave a link to the map in the description box below so that you can also access it yourself. And that way you'll be able to zoom in on areas that maybe seem unclear and really digest it at your leisure. And so without further ado, let's take a look. So starting in the south, in Rafah, this is where the popular forces have their stronghold. Now, it's estimated that they have around 500 to 700 fighters. And as you'll notice, I've had to gather information from a whole wide variety of sources, because these are very informal sorts of groups that are very undercover. And so there are very few sources who actually are able to obtain figures, and there are no actual official figures, hence why there are so many sources. So Rafah, just to break it down, is a very densely populated and highly populated city in Gaza. As you can see on the map, it is the southernmost city and it's on the border with Egypt. And the reason why it is so important is because early on in the war, when Israel first started its incursion into Gaza, the Israeli army started off with northern Gaza. And so at the time when they started the invasion into northern Gaza, they coordinated efforts to evacuate civilians down south. And so Rafah became a hub for the civilians evacuees and has remained a very densely populated area. And so the fact that popular forces have become so prominent in Rafah was a huge blow to Hamas, because ultimately this was a huge potential stronghold for them going forward. Now, we then see, if we go a little bit further, the counter-terrorism strike force. So this is quite a small group. They generally centered in Khan Yunis, and they only have around 40 fighters or so. Moving on, in Gaza City, we see the Shujaya Popular Defense Forces, and they have over 10 full fighters from what we can gather, and that figure is from Erim News, another Arabic source. And then in Beit Hanun, which is the northernmost region of the Gaza Strip, we have the Popular Army Northern Forces, which has also around 40 fighters. That figures from the Noon Post, another Arabic source. Finally, if we look at the Hamas figures, you'll see that there's quite a big discrepancy. So according to the Israeli security sources, Hamas had between 25,000 to 30,000 fighters before the war started on October 7th, 2023. The IDF since estimates that between 17,000 and 23,000 Hamas militants have been killed. And that's why you have an estimate of between 2,000 and 13,000 fighters remaining. And as you can see from the circles on the map, they are still very much scattered across the Gaza Strip, but they obviously don't have that same centralized power that they used to, due to the majority of their senior leadership being dismantled and neutralized by the Israeli military. Now, what's really important for us to note is that while many of these militias are very small compared to Hamas, they've actually achieved some very notable victories against Hamas, and some of them are actually quite influential with very prominent leaders. So I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of who these factions are and why it's actually so important for us to know about them, even though many of them are quite small. So starting with the popular forces of Abu Shabab, what's really important to note about them is that they are comprised of the Bedouin Tarabin tribes. So the Bedouins are generally a pretty nomadic group. They're often found in southern Israel as well as Gaza and Egypt as well. And what's really important to note about them is that they are gangsters who've often controlled East Rafah. In fact, certain insiders even call Abu Shabab, sort of the man to negotiate with in East Rafah. And that's due to his massive prominence there. And one of the biggest military victories that they actually got against Hamas came in the city of Khan Yunis, which is just a little further north. And what happened there is that they claimed responsibility for an assault on a Hamas position at the Khan Yunis University College of Applied Sciences, which is one of the biggest institutions in the entire city. So that was a devastating loss for Hamas. According to the popular forces, Hamas's Arrow unit was using this facility to hoard confiscated humanitarian aid that was meant for the people. Hamas responded by branding the group as a front for Israel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appeared to reinforce the suspicion when he acknowledged that Israel had provided weapons to clans opposing Hamas, as we previously alluded to. Dozens of the militia's fighters, including Shabab's brother, have been killed in clashes with Hamas, and now so too has Abu Shabab himself. So moving on to the counter-terrorism strike force, while they might be a small group, they're actually quite an important group. And the reason for this is because their leader is Hussam al-Astal. Now, Astal is actually a former officer in the Palestinian Authority's Preventative Security Service. And this is basically their intelligence agency, sort of like the FBI in America. And so this is a real insider who has access to highly classified intelligence and other information. So he is obviously a very big threat to Hamas. So what's really interesting is that he's been accused by Hamas of involvement in the 2018 assassination of Hamas-affiliated engineer Fadi al-Bach. And so this is already someone that's been on their radar for a very long time. And the fact that he operates in Khan Yunis, again, is a very big threat to Hamas, even though his militia is incredibly small. We then move on to the Shujaya Popular Defense Forces, who operate within Gaza City itself. So the smallest of the group of militias we are discussing, their leader is Rami Khiles, and he is a member of Fatah, according to pro-Hamas media. What's really interesting about this is that Fatah is the armed wing of the Palestinian Authority of Mahmoud Abbas. And for those of you who might not be aware, Abbas is the leader in the West Bank, and the Palestinian Authority is a bitter enemy of Hamas. So back when there were the Gaza elections after the Israeli withdrawal, Hamas and the Palestinian Authority went head-to-head in the election, and Hamas emerged victorious. But after they took control of the Strip, they started an outright slaughter of Fatah members because they viewed them as such a threat. And so the vast majority of known Fatah members were either neutralized in these clashes or they escaped. And Fatah is almost exclusively found only in the West Bank. And so the fact that you've got this leader in the heart of Gaza City is quite a concern for Hamas, especially with the high-level information that he has at his disposal. Ynet news agency reported that Rami Khiles had received operational assistance from the Israel Defense Forces, and so it seems that even the IDF themselves have faith in his ability to cause an uprising or at very least greatly unsettle Hamas and their plans. Moving further north, back to Bet Hanun, where we have the Popular Army Northern Forces. So what's really interesting about this group is that their leader, Ashraf al-Mansi, is a very covert individual, and there's no reliable public information on his background. But what's really interesting is that despite their small size, they've managed to establish a base of operations in an abandoned school roughly 500 meters inside the Israeli-controlled zone of northern Gaza. So Hamas has accused Mansi and his fighters of serving as informants for Israel's Shin Bet intelligence agency and described them as criminals involved in the drug trade. A source aligned with Hamas claimed that Al-Qassam fighters, and those are Hamas's armed wing, engaged in clashes with Mansi's faction in the Jabalia and Bet Lahia areas, a report echoed by social media accounts on October 10th. 4 days later, on October 14th, Mansi published a video denying that a Hamas crackdown had occurred and declaring that his forces had seized control of several areas in northern Gaza. And so it's very interesting to see how not only do they have a base there, but they do seem to have claimed control of various parts of northern Gaza. And of course, while being a very small group, they do seem to pose quite a massive threat to Hamas, a disproportionate threat, in fact. And so, as we can see, Hamas's attention had to be diverted in many different directions. They have 4 different militias across the Gaza Strip, as well as Israel to think about, although the ceasefire remains in place. Now, again, as I explained, Abu Shabab's death means everything. It could mean the deterioration and the division of the popular forces, which remains by far the biggest threat to Hamas in terms of the size of their militia and the weapons that they have. There are still these other small groups, but even then, it's important to note that if the popular forces was to deteriorate further, that would mean that Hamas would be able to divert their energy at fewer other targets. Furthermore, if Hamas was able to re-establish control of the Gaza Strip and actually be able to defeat these groups, that means that they would be one step closer to re-engaging with Israel and ultimately commencing another full-scale war across the Gaza border. And so Israel will surely want to be on high alert and ensure that they track Hamas's every move. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you found it interesting, please remember to subscribe to the channel for more content. Also, let me know in the comment section below, what do you think? Do you think that this could be a turning point in the Middle East conflict? Or do you think that the popular forces may be able to regroup and even keep Hamas at bay? Who knows? Either way, looking forward to seeing you in the next video. Until next time, I'm Matthew Cohen, and this is the Power Pod.